Make no mistake, Apple's new M1 MacBooks are amazing machines. When I first heard about them, I ordered a maxed out 13-inch MacBook Pro because I was so excited for the potential. But then I started watching reviews, and after what I saw, I canceled my order and bought the new baseline MacBook Air instead. No one else out there is saying this, so I guess I will. The vast majority of people out there should not buy the M1 MacBook Pro, and they should just get the MacBook Air instead. In this video, I'll tell you why. Now, to be completely fair, there are some advantages to the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and I will get to those. But as it stands right now, I don't see a solid reason to purchase the MacBook Pro over the MacBook Air. I'm Titus, and let's talk about why the MacBook Air is the better buy. I've been using the MacBook Air for about a week. I've edited 2 4K videos, done some graphic design, and even played a few games. And I have been blown away by the performance of this tiny, thin laptop. If you don't know, this MacBook Air is equipped with the exact same processor as the MacBook Pro, the M1. There's only one difference between this specific baseline MacBook Air, and it's that you get one less GPU core, so it has a 7-core GPU instead of an 8-core GPU. From the benchmarks I've seen online, the 8th core gives you about 15% extra performance for graphics. Now that's not nothing, but the CPU performance is exactly the same with the exact same 8 cores. In practice, it takes a lot to push these new M1s to their limit. One thing I've seen people online say that if you get the Air, you're going to run into throttling, meaning that the processor will heat up, and because the MacBook Air does not have a fan to cool it down, it sort of eases off the throttle a little to help cool it down. And yes, that is kind of true. It does slow down when it gets too hot, but the thing is, it takes a lot to get this MacBook Air to throttle. What I've seen in a few videos is people running these tough benchmarks over and over and over. And yeah, if you do that, the score is going to gradually get lower and lower and lower as the temperatures get high and it starts to slow down a little bit. Here's the problem though. Basically, nobody uses their computers like this. Unless the task you're doing is just constantly intense and a heavy load on the CPU and/or GPU, you're not going to notice any real difference between the Air and the Pro. Now, there is one real world scenario that I've seen people talk about online, and that's if you export a timeline from a program like Final Cut, for instance, on the Air and the Pro. I've seen a couple times where the Pro was a little bit faster, and I've also seen times where they were nearly identical in terms of the speed. Again, I don't really think that matters to that many people. Let's just say for the sake of argument that the Pro is always a little bit quicker on rendering for a video. That's not a big deal because that's not time that you're actually working on your laptop. You're not seeing that slowdown in real time. You're not gonna notice 45 extra seconds on a render. That's time that you can walk away, take a break, or move on to something else while it's rendering in the background. Now, to help prove this point, I downloaded 2 apps to just kind of watch the laptops as it's working to see what is hitting it hard and what's not. And you can see all the little stats up here. You can see the temperature, and then you can see the CPU usage and the GPU usage and how much memory that I'm using. This is the 8 gig model, by the way. I've been specifically keeping my eyes on the temperature on the chip to see what it takes to get the temperature to go over 80 degrees Celsius. After some benchmarking and some testing, I noticed that 80 degrees Celsius is when this computer will start to throttle and start to slow down because the temperatures are getting too high. This thing is insane. Editing 4K video is a breeze in Final Cut, and it didn't get anywhere near 80 degrees Celsius while I was using it. I also did some normal stuff. I did some just document editing, some web browsing, some watching of YouTube, and that stuff doesn't do anything to the Air. It didn't even get over 40 degrees Celsius. Also did some graphic design with Pixelmator Pro, and again, it was painless. It runs almost perfectly, and the temperatures didn't get high at all. I don't think it got over 40 degrees Celsius either. I will note that Pixelmator Pro is optimized for the new M1 chips, by the way, and it's pretty awesome if you haven't used it before. What I'm getting at is the Air is plenty powerful, and unless you're doing something that just constantly maxes it out, you're not gonna benefit from upgrading to the Pro. Now, gaming might be a different story, but I doubt you're interested in this MacBook for its gaming performance. I doubt a lot of you guys out there are like, get out of my way, PS5. Get out of my way, Xbox Series X. I'm gonna get me a MacBook Air. But for the sake of argument, let's see how it impacts gaming. Fortnite isn't made for the M1 yet, but it actually worked pretty well in emulation. The graphics and the smoothness was pretty good. I looked through my Steam library, and the only game I had that had decent graphics and worked on Macs was Tomb Raider. And again, it worked great, it looked great. And also, this game wasn't made for the M1 processor. Now we'll note that some games just don't work. For instance, I couldn't get the Steam version of Among Us to work, but I could get the iPad version of Among Us to work on the MacBook. I will admit I was excited to see what having iPad games on this Mac would look like, and to be honest, it's a bit underwhelming. It's really wonky because you can't do full screen gaming on this with anything made for a phone, and you can't use the WASD keys, the WASD keys, and you have to use like their touch controls with your mouse, which is weird. Okay, I alluded to that there are some reasons that you should consider the MacBook Pro instead, and so to be fair, let's get to those reasons, because there's a pretty good handful of reasons. First, the microphones on the Pro are supposed to be what Apple calls studio quality, and the Airs aren't. Which, by the way, studio quality? Really, Apple? I guess I can just throw out my SM7B when I get one of these MacBook Pros. Hey guys, check out my new dope mic stand. The MacBook Air's mics are fine, by the way. People haven't complained at all when I used them, and they say it sounds pretty good. Pro also has a touch bar, which so did my last MacBook Pro, and I almost never used it. Hot take, I think the only people who actually like the touch bar on Macs are people who actually haven't used them. By the way, I'm doing a follow-up video to this comparing my cheaper MacBook Air to my 4-year-old 15-inch MacBook Pro, which has the touch bar, and I'm trying to determine if the Air can replace that, because I think most of you people out there probably aren't looking to replace a MacBook you got last year, but probably one from a couple years ago. Subscribe and enable notifications if that interests you. On the new MacBook Pro, the battery life is a bit better, but I think the Air's battery life has been fantastic, so it's not a big deal to me. Pro also includes a fan, which is why it doesn't throttle, because it can cool itself. What's interesting is I keep hearing people say that when the fan is running, they can't really hear it, even if they put their ear up to the MacBook Pro. It's almost like it's barely spinning, and it doesn't really need a fan, just a thought. The screen is also a little bit brighter on the Pro, and I mean just a little, but otherwise, the screen on the Air is, I got no complaints, it's great. And lastly, the trackpad is a little bit bigger on the Pro. It's not much, but okay, I get that. And that alone might be the best reason to upgrade, but I will note the Air's is still plenty big, and I don't have any issues with it. You can't get an Air with the 8-core GPU, by the way, but the weird thing is Apple makes you also jump up the SSD size to get it, so you have to get a 512 gig hard drive as well. Now that jumps the baseline MacBook Air from $1,000 to $1,250, which again makes this a tougher choice if you're still considering the Pro. The Pro at $1,299 gives you all that stuff I mentioned before, versus what this other version of the MacBook Air at $1,250 gives you, which is 256 gigs of extra storage and a cool $50 bill left in your pocket. It's almost like Apple wanted this to be a difficult decision, which is why they don't just let you upgrade the GPU in the baseline MacBook Air, which would be a $50 upgrade. That's crazy talk. Apple would never manipulate me to spend more money with them. I'll just end with this. I have no regrets in buying the baseline $1,000 MacBook Air. This thing is awesome and it's an insane value. If you get one and it supports the apps that you need it to support, I think you're gonna love it. I was this close to dropping $2,500 buying a maxed out MacBook Pro, and I am so glad that I pulled the plug on that. And Apple still has the MacBook 16-inch and the iMacs on the way, and most likely they're going to have the M1X processor with them. Those chips just might do laps around these M1s, and when they come out, I can reevaluate and decide if I need that extra power. I've been so impressed with the MacBook Air, I don't think I will, but we'll see. Another thing to keep in mind is there has been a rumored 14-inch MacBook Pro for a while now, and if that comes out, they might actually just phase out the M1 MacBook Pro. But I don't see them phasing out this MacBook Air anytime soon. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like. It helps out a ton and I super appreciate it. Again, I haven't 100% decided that I'm gonna keep the MacBook Air, because I still like my 2016 MacBook Pro. So I'm going to be doing that comparison video very soon, and I'm going to be deciding which MacBook I'm going to keep. So subscribe and enable notifications if you're interested in that video. Thanks again for watching. I'm Titus, and I will see you next time.